Hey everyone, as promised, making a short video for you guys to go over the last of the round 4 requirements so we can wrap this up and move on to our super short and easy round 5. What I figured I'd do for this video is start out by just giving you a few kind of general reminders about your full sentence outlines as you all are wrapping those up and preparing to turn those in. No new information there, just things that I'd like to remind you of so that they're fresh in your mind as you put the finishing touches on those brilliant outlines. Then I will go into the actual rubric of the round 4 speech and just kind of walk you through how I'm going to grade it. I will put timestamps in the description of this video, so feel free to skip around to whichever parts will be most helpful for you. So let's get started. First, talking about your outline. So remember, your outline is organized in Monroe's motivated sequence, so it's broken up into 5 steps. I created like this little short cheat sheet document that I will include in the email that I send you, and I'll throw it up on Moodle as well. This information is not any different from the round 4 outline information that's in the back of your textbook in the appendix or the supplementary material. I just added a little bit more to it, little pointers here and there that may help you kind of understand it or expand and get a better idea for what it is that I'm looking for in that particular section. Feel free to peruse through this, but a few things that I wanted to point out to you all real quick, just so I make sure we're all on the same page, is first of all, of course, those 5 steps. That's how we are organizing this round's speech. Step 2 and step 3 make up the bulk of your speech. That is the problem and the need, and then the solution/satisfaction that you're proposing to us. So a common problem that I see in the problem section of some students' outlines, or something that they maybe don't quite emphasize enough or expand on enough when they're writing their outlines, is this final point right here at the end. Making sure that you don't just tell us this problem exists or that this need exists, but make us care about it. Convince us that this is really a big deal. This is having negative impacts. Tell us how it's negatively impacting our lives. Give us that so what. Make us care about this thing. So don't just tell us it's happening. Tell us why it's bad. Tell us how it's hurting us, how it's harming us. Is it really that big of a deal? This is where you would convince us of that. Usually when I have round 4 outlines that are a little too short, it's usually because they're missing this part or not quite emphasizing it enough. So once you have your problem and your need all set, you move on to step 3 of Monroe's motivated sequence, which is the solution and satisfaction that you are proposing to us. So make sure here that you not only explain what it is that you want us to do, but also prove to us that doing this will actually address or solve that problem or need that you did a brilliant job of convincing us just a moment earlier in step 2. So make sure that connection is super strong when you are developing your content. And of course, like we just talked about in class, this is the step where you will also include those 2 obstacles or arguments against why someone might do this. Again, the point of this is to kind of anticipate excuses you might get from your audience, reasons why they don't want to do this, reasons why they won't think it'll work, and anticipating them and addressing them. So make sure that you are still providing your evidence and reasoning. So we're still using strong argumentation, but you will identify 2 of those obstacles and give us suggestions for overcoming them. General reminder, as far as your outline goes, this little cheat sheet that I made you guys is half a page long. Your full sentence outlines should be significantly longer than that. So probably 2.5 to 3 pages. You don't need to include these little prompts that I give you. Your full sentence outline should be everything you plan to say in your speech and only the things that you plan to say in your speech. So no need to include these little prompts here that I give you like this. Your full sentence outline, again, should probably be 2.5 to 3 pages. A lot of that length comes from what I have is one point right here for evidence, reasoning, etc. will probably be several points in your full sentence outline. You're probably going to have more than just one piece of evidence to support your claim, especially a big claim. You'll also have reasoning. You may need to add in some context and things like that. So again, just like last round, I strongly recommend that you go take a look at the sample outlines that are available in the back of your textbook, in that supplementary material. There are two full sentence outlines, and they're the full sentence outlines for those 2 sample speeches for portion distortion and the Eastern Illinois Food Bank. So here you can get a good idea of how this turns into a much longer full sentence outline. Definitely make use of those resources that are available to you, either on Moodle, here, the things that I upload like this, or the resources in the back of your textbook or in the supplementary material. Guess when you have an ebook, there's not really a back to your textbook. So now that we've kind of wrapped up the outline, we're going to get into the good part, the actual speech rubric and how I will be grading your speeches. So remember, this round of speeches is in person, in class, not recorded like round 3. You will also have slides in this round, just like you did last round, but you'll have them in person. So there's a little bit more that goes into that, which we'll cover. So your round 4 speech has a little bit of a different introduction. Mainly because we're not giving you all the bits and pieces that go into it. We are leaving it a little bit more up to you to have some creative license and decide how you'd like to grab our attention. Feel free to be a little more creative with it this round. You don't have to include your thesis or your benefits to your audience or a preview. In fact, you probably shouldn't include a preview. So remember, in your introduction, I don't want to hear anything about your solution or satisfaction yet. No spoilers yet. Because before you can convince us to do something, you have to convince us that there's a problem to solve. So don't get ahead of yourself. No mentioning of your solution or satisfaction. That's step 3 in your introduction. No spoilers. Just grab our attention as best as you can. All I'm looking for in that introduction. So once we move on from that, then we get to the body, the bulk of our speech, that need and satisfaction, and also the visualization step. So as I go over these 2 right here, the problem and the solution, it's going to sound really familiar, kind of what I just talked you through in terms of your outline. So the problem and need clearly explained and proven. What I'm looking for there is that not only that you kind of identify it and explain it, but prove that this problem exists for your particular audience, for your classmates, and again, really impress on us that this problem or this need going unfulfilled has negative impacts on the lives of your audience members. Make it real to them. Make sure that you impress on them the necessity of getting rid of this problem or satisfying this need. So make sure you convincingly kind of prove that this thing is having a negative impact. Of course, you should use also strong argumentation, claim, evidence, reasoning. That goes for the whole speech. Moving on to your solution and satisfaction, beyond just, again, identifying and explaining what it is you want us to do, make sure that you're really giving us enough detail so that we understand exactly what it is you're asking of us or what you are calling for, rather than just saying, you should start eating healthier. Tell us how, in what way, that kind of thing. So make sure that you're being specific and that you're giving us enough detail so that we know specifically what it is that you're asking of us. Again, make sure that you prove that doing this will solve that problem or need that you convinced us of just moments ago. And as always, following good argumentation, having your claim and your evidence and your reasoning. So your obstacles, again, that is part of step 3, your solution and satisfaction. I'll be looking for you to identify and explain those 2 obstacles and include that appropriate argumentation. Also, make sure that you don't outright dismiss these potential arguments against or obstacles. So it's not quite enough to say, that's not really an issue. Moving on. You'll need to at least acknowledge that, yes, some people may think this is an obstacle, and then offer us some ways around it, some solutions, some alternatives, or convince us otherwise. So we've gotten through the bulk of your content. This visualization step is moving towards your conclusion a little bit. What I want you to do here during this visualization step is describe to your audience a reality in which this problem has been addressed, this need has been satisfied. What will their lives be like now that they've done this thing? They've taken care of this. They don't have to worry about those negative impacts anymore. We have accomplished what we've come here to accomplish. Describe that to us. Like, paint us a picture of that. This is where vivid language that appeal to your audience's senses or their emotions are really effective. So use that vivid sensory language, perhaps some emotional appeals in this. If you're still having trouble figuring out what this looks like in a speech, the sample speech about the Eastern Illinois Food Bank, I think, had an excellent visualization section to it. So definitely go watch that or browse through that sample outline to see what a great visualization step looks like. I will, of course, be looking for audience adaptation throughout your speech. This includes not just taking into account what your audience prioritizes, what they value, but also where their knowledge levels are. So keep in mind what you learned from your classmates when we did the audience analysis activity. This also includes making sure you round your numbers, that you're not just vomiting a bunch of statistics at us that we don't understand, putting things into context, all of that awesome stuff that we talked about last round. Make sure you keep doing that, sprinkled all the way throughout your speech. Again, just like last round, nothing has changed as far as this goes. I'm still looking for at least 3 credible sources, and that in your speech you cite them using the publication name and the date. So not the title of the article or even the author of the article. If it's like a newspaper article or a journal article or something like that, I want the publication. Where did you find it? Was it New York Times? Was it the Journal of Pediatrics? Tell me where you found it. Because remember, if you give us like the journalist's name or even the researcher's name, like that doesn't really mean anything to your audience. We have no idea who that is. But the Journal of Pediatrics, we've heard of that. That probably carries a little bit more weight, is a little bit more effective in persuading your audience that you have good information. So use the publication name and the date. Finally, as far as your content goes, I'll be looking for specific and persuasive language. What I mean by this is trying to avoid vague generalities, trying to use language in a way that adds clarity and interest to the content you're presenting us. Being really specific, being really persuasive, especially when you're considering where your audience is starting as far as their attitudes towards whatever it is you're trying to persuade us to do. Keeping that language vivid and specific is really important, especially if you have a neutral or positive audience, because that's when your biggest challenge is holding their attention, remember? So, specific, persuasive language that adds clarity and interest kind of throughout the content of your speech is what I'm looking for there. Finally, moving on to that conclusion. So, this is step 5 of Monroe's motivated sequence, the action step. This is the part of your speech where you tell the audience the specific concrete action that you want us to take in the near future. This is where you'll tell us, go home and download this app, or when you're walking to your next class, go to this website and donate. Something like that, something really clear, really specific, something short term that we can get started on to do this thing that you're trying to convince us to do. So make sure here that you emphasize the ease and kind of the realistic implementation of this thing you're trying to convince us of. Make sure here that you include all the necessary information or tools that we might need, like websites, for example. So this is where you go from kind of broader things that you want us to do to here's the first step to get you started. Here's what you should do now. Here's what you should do tonight. Here's what you should do tomorrow morning. One of those things, like start thinking near future, first baby steps. What do you want us to get started doing? And the point here is that you are leaving us feeling empowered. You're like, yeah, okay, well, that sounds really simple and really realistic to start. Like, I can definitely do that. I have the information I need. It seems super simple. I'm ready to go. So you leave your audience feeling motivated, feeling empowered, feeling like they can definitely do this thing that you're trying to persuade us of. So that's what I'm looking for in your action step, as well as your final thought. Leave us feeling empowered. Moving on to your visual aids. Again, you will be using slides for your speech in class. Make sure that your slides are clear, that they support your message, that they are not distracting. Generally speaking, I'd like to see at least one slide for each of the 5 steps in Monroe's motivated sequence. You can totally have more than that, but I'd love to see at least one for each step. A lot of times I have students end up making the obstacles their own slide because otherwise they feel like it's just a little bit too much information to fit all on one slide. So feel free to take that route if you think that would work for your content. So again, just as a reminder, your slides should be clean. They should be supporting your message instead of distracting from it. Try to cut down on the words as much as possible. Keep it super simple. I want to hear you talk about those things. I don't want to have to read it on your slide. So as few distractions as possible is always good. No extra information or anything like that. And always make sure that you are including that chart or graph or figure or infographic, just like you did last round. So moving on to the delivery section and what I'm looking for here. First of all, successful use of visual aids. Essentially, like, how are you using your slides? Making sure that you display the correct slide at the correct time, that you remember to switch the slide to the next thing that you're talking about. So I'm going to bring this on presentation day. It's just a little thing that hooks into my laptop so that you can switch the slides remotely so you won't have to run back and forth. So making sure that you display your slides at the correct time. If it is helpful, you can always put something like an asterisk or a giant line somewhere in your keyword outline, wherever it is that you need to switch your slide to remind you. So making sure that you're showing the right slide when you're talking about things, to verbally and physically refer to your slides. Make sure, though, that when you do that, you're keeping that open body position towards your audience. Even if you look back at something really quickly, you might glance at it, point, and then return to that full open body position towards your audience. Don't speak at your slides. They don't care. But we do. We care a lot. We want to hear it. Your slides don't. Appropriate use of gestures in space is kind of hearkening back to things that we talked about in round 2. Making use of all that room up at the front of the classroom, making sure that when you gesture and use your hands, you are making your gestures big, above the waist, out from your body, just like when you were holding those objects in your round 2 speech. There are some great videos in our video library about gestures. If that's something that you're not all that comfortable with, I highly recommend go check those out. A lot of you have really great kind of instincts for gestures, and I've commented on those already. So as you're practicing your speech this round, start playing around with gestures more. Start brainstorming where in your speech you can incorporate some of them in. If you are referencing the size of something really big or something really small, if you're counting things, these are all great ways to incorporate gestures that add some attention and some interest to what it is that you're saying. So making sure that you have gestures, you're using your space. Again, feel free to go check out those videos, try some stuff out as you practice. Professional posture and appearance, eye contact, diction, vocal energy, all of these are things that we have talked about before, that I've graded on before. They're just really key core parts of delivery. So we have to keep making sure that we're doing them and doing them well. Making sure that your posture stays really nice and pretty, even when you're answering your questions at the end of your speech. Making sure that your eye contact isn't at your slides or the projector behind you, but that you're keeping eye contact with your audience. Vocal energy is super important when you're giving a persuasive speech, especially, again, if you have a positive or neutral audience. You gotta get them interested. So energy goes a long way into doing that. Now we get to vocal fillers. So like I talked about in class, I'm not going to be taking off a point for every that I hear. What I'm looking for here is that your vocal fillers are not happening to the extent that they detract from your message or make it harder for you to get your point across, for us to understand you, or even like harm your credibility or things like that. When you tend to and a lot, sometimes people will assume you don't know what you're talking about. That's no good. We're trying to persuade people, so we have to come across as authoritative. So when we are speaking persuasively, try to cut down those vocal fillers. Again, don't worry too much about it. You're not going to lose a point per a point per It'll be all right. As you're practicing, try to be aware of which vocal fillers you use, how, where, when you use them in your speech. And then as you're aware of that, you can start to slow down and cut those out where you can. Pace and extemporaneous, again, same thing as we've been doing all semester. Making sure you're not speaking too quickly, maybe working in some pauses for emphasis at the really pivotal moments of persuasion. Extemporaneous, keeping that conversational tone, not reading your full sentence outline. Easy stuff. Finally, we're at the very end. the Q&A. So again, each student will be asking a speaker 2 questions. I'll have the speakers listed on the board, and we'll kind of match everyone up, make sure that everyone has a question asker. When it's your turn to ask questions of a speaker, it's a great idea to take notes. What I'm looking for in your question, because your questions that you ask are part of your speech grade, what I'm looking for is questions that are specific to the content that you were just listening to. Clarifying questions are great. Expansion questions are great. Things like, can you tell me a little bit more about this thing that you talked about? Or I wasn't quite understanding this portion of it. Could you clarify that? Or how should we go about doing this thing that you mentioned? The type of questions that I want to avoid are things like, what's the most interesting thing you learned when you were researching your topic? Or what makes you so passionate about this topic? Things like that. If it's a question you could ask any speaker, that's what we want to try to avoid. I want your questions to be specific to the content. And answering questions effectively, just want to reiterate what I told you guys in class. I care less about your answer than about how you handle the answers. I want you guys to be able to keep your professional posture, keep that poise up at the front of the room, that eye contact, that confidence, even if you don't know the answer. So if you don't understand their question, make sure that you ask them to clarify. Don't try to ramble on and just word vomit. It's better to ask for clarification and be concise, even if that means being concise is saying, that's a really interesting question. I didn't run across that in my research, but I would love to find that answer and get back to you. Beautiful. Totally fine. Again, I care less about do you know the answer and much more about how are you handling this interaction. So don't ramble. Tell us if you don't know. That's totally okay. Try and stay on topic. If you're not sure what they're asking, ask them to clarify. Or once you give an answer, say, did that answer your question? Did I get to what you were asking me there? Also totally fine. So just make sure you keep that poise that you have throughout your speech, and make sure that you are coming across as confident, like you know your stuff. Even if you're telling us, I have no idea, I want your body language to say, I know. So that's all that I have for the rubric and the outline stuff. If you have questions about wrapping up your outline, if you have questions about the Round 4 speech in general, I would love to talk to you about them. Also remember, if you think it would be more helpful for you to talk through feedback on your full sentence outline instead of getting written feedback from me, I'm also very open to that. I've done that before, but I want to leave it up to you all. You know how you learn best and kind of what you need to be successful. So if you think having a discussion with me and us talking through your outline would be more helpful than written feedback, very up for it. Just send me an email, give me a couple suggestions for times that we could meet, and we will make something work. I hope you all have a wonderful fall break, that you find some time to restore yourselves, and that you all have safe travels. I'm happy to meet with you over Thanksgiving break, but I do hope that you find some time to take off and relax. We're so close to being done. You guys have done awesome this semester, and I am just thrilled. And these topics y'all have turned in for round 4 are just awesome. This is going to be a really good round. So let me know if you have questions. I'm always here to help, and hopefully this video was helpful. Let me know if you have questions. I'll see y'all soon.